Awesome. Well, thank you so much to everybody joining us right now. My name is John Kennedy. I'm the founder and CEO of Mesa Cloud. If you want to learn more about what we do, you can check out our website. But long story short, our technology equips counselors to deliver the equitable on-time graduation that every student deserves. I started Mesa when I was 16, and now I'm 21. And those 5 years of working with counselors and administrators have frankly taught me more about this country than anything I ever learned in school. Students entrust their future to their school systems, and I've learned that far too often the system fails them, disproportionately students of color, and the injustices and inequities that all of us are here in this room virtually are here to address. It's just really just one manifestation of the way that racism is built into the core of this country, and a fact that I feel like many privileged people haven't had to fully confront, haven't had to have that dialogue until right now. The fact that we're all here, the fact that over 4,000 people registered this, 4,200 to be exact, which is crazy. This is just such a really cool moment for me personally. And as a young person, this feels like the first real window in my lifetime to turn all this coverage, all this noise, all this attention into real structural change. You know, it's our duty to not just show up and not just address it, but to stick around, to channel all this attention into social and political progress, into actual results. You know, right now, silence on this issue is betrayal. And it's our duty to use our privilege, at least in Mesa's case, also our video conferencing infrastructure, to amplify the incredible leadership we're going to get today from our panelists. We are so fortunate to be a part of this webinar. So now I'm going to shut up and pass off to Derek Francis, who deserves all of the credit for putting this together. I am just personally a dude with a business Zoom account. Derek Francis has been a tireless advocate on these issues for years. Derek pinged me on Monday saying that he had a great webinar planned. He had some awesome panelists. He just needed a platform. So Derek, take us away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, John, just for helping us create this space. I'm a school counselor. I've been a school counselor for 8 years now. And so moving to digital platform has had its challenges. So it's awesome to have the support. And also thanks for using your privilege to do social justice work. Friends, John was in high school 3 years ago, probably, if he's 21. So it's awesome seeing that we can make an impact on our students by the proactive work we do as school counselors. I'm Derek Francis. I'm a school counselor in Minnesota. I'm joined by 3 awesome colleagues. I'll have them introduce themselves, then we'll get started.
I guess I'll go first. My name is Marsha Rutledge. I'm assistant professor at Longwood University out in Farmville, Virginia. I also represent the Virginia School Counselor Association as the Communications and Public Relations Chair. And I'm so excited to have so many people join in on this important and necessary conversation that we're going to have today. I want to say, you know, I don't know how much Derek is going to say about this, but I want to say that we're going to be true and we're going to be authentic and transparent in how we frame this conversation today. And that may make some people uncomfortable. And I want to say that's okay to be uncomfortable. So don't log off, you know, stay with us. Because I think that as we move forward in the school systems, as we move forward as school counselors and educators, this is a issue that's not going away. And I think the beginnings of this conversation that we're going to have today is going to help you as you go back to your school systems and begin having those courageous conversations with your teachers, with your other colleagues, administrators, and so forth. So thank you so much for joining us today.
I can go next. I am Marguerite Ortman. I am an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota. In my role there, I am the director of school counseling and clinical training. I also serve as the Minnesota School Counselor Association president. I am very honored to be here today, and you're probably thinking, why is there a white woman on this panel? Why a white lady? And I'm like, I'm the white lady today. I'm very excited to be here. I've had a great relationship with Derek. We've been working together, and I just wanted to be here to represent a lot of our counselors and like how to handle this as a white person. And so I'm going to be speaking my truth. I'm going to be humble and hopefully you will be too with me, some humility. I'm by no means an expert, but I do think that we need to talk and we need to have these discussions. So I'm very honored to be here and so excited to see so many people from across the country. Wow. Just such an exciting time. So thank you for joining us and thanks for being here.
And I think I'll echo those same sentiments. My name is Robert Jameson, Bobby Jameson from Virginia Beach, Virginia. Saw a lot of Virginia Beach, a lot of Virginia in the as they were logging on and in the chat. So thank you and hello. Been a school counselor now, or related to school counseling, for the past, this is 13 years. Coordinator of school counseling in Virginia Beach. I'm on the board of directors for VSCA. Proudly served that, and humbled to even be a part of this conversation and be a part of this panel today. Also humbled by the fact that there's so many passionate people who want to move this work forward, and it's validating. It's refreshing to a certain degree. It provides hope. It instills a lot of hope in the work that we're doing. Definitely with Marsha and with Marguerite, and I know Derek's going to be authentic with this too. We're just here to have an honest conversation, and that's really what this is about. And please know, we realize as we move through this presentation probably pretty quickly that it's an outline, almost a survey of the various topics that need to be addressed in more detail moving forward, and that we just wanted to speak our truths, I should say, in relation to this topic. So again, thank you. To keep it moving, I'll keep it short. So happy to be here today, humbled to participate.
Cool. Awesome. Let's get started. And I'm sharing my screen. So before I jump in, I want to share that I'm manager of counseling services for Minneapolis Public Schools. We have an amazing team, and we've been navigating a major racial incident right here in our city. I'm from here, born and raised, and these incidents can be hard to navigate. I know some of you across the country are experiencing the same thing. How do you have conversations with students? How do you break the silence? How do you address things that are going on in your building? So that's what the space is for. We want to be in it. Our hearts are with us, counselors throughout the country, trying to figure out how to do this. So this webinar is designed to be a space where we learn. We're going to learn from each other, hear different perspectives. We're going to be vulnerable. So we're going to be vulnerable. I'm going to share some things that are icky, some of the biases I have. And we ask that this is a proactive space. When you leave here, do something differently because of what you heard. Not just soak it in as head knowledge and be like, oh yeah, I know this stuff, or I read this book, or I went to that seminar. Do something different because of what you heard today. And then also, please put your questions in the chat, because our goal is to try to answer those once we were at the end of the session.
Derek, can I make one correction? If they could put their questions in the question and answer, the Q&A function.
Okay.
The chat, but the Q&A.
Okay. There you go. Put it in the Q&A. So what we're going to do, we're going to talk about addressing the silence. We're going to cover race-based trauma that students and staff are experiencing. Well, systematic barriers in school counseling, how to have a comprehensive, proactive, equity-based response, and then understanding how to be allies and accomplices. So why is this conversation around counselors addressing racism important? First of all, for our students' overall achievement. These conversations and lack thereof these conversations impact our students' achievement. It's a contributing factor to the gaps that we have around opportunity, achievement, and then also engagement gap. This is an opportunity to engage our students of color who traditionally don't get engagement around race. Your school climate and environment. And this is taking on a new look because we're in a digital platform. Your school climate in a traditional school setting, students have these conversations. Major race incidents happen in our schools all the time. And so if we're not addressing these issues, it really impacts the school environment and climate and the working environment. That's why I have next is the relationship with students. Students know who in the school they can talk to about race. They know what staff they can talk to, and then also staff. They know and feel it in the air if these conversations are hard. It plays a number on the relationship. Counseling is a relationship business. We have to be relationship focused. And so to strengthen your relationship with students, you have to talk about race. Race is a key piece of their identity. And then the last piece of why we have to have these conversations is that it combats the system of oppression. Our country is seeing the different layers of oppression that exist. We see it with educational gaps all the time, but now we're seeing it with our law enforcement. We always see it with socioeconomics. And it gets exhausting hearing all the stats and data around all the different systems of oppression. And now as school counselors, we're called to be proactive. Let's do something about it. I also want to make a reference to ASCA. That is the framework that many of us are working from. Many of us attend ASCA, attend our state conferences, and this is the foundation for counselors. And so ASCA, and this is also for school counselors that are like, oh, this work is hard, or maybe that's something they should talk about at home. No, this is on us. We're school counselors. This is our work to do. This is for us to talk about. It's a part of our students' identity, and ASCA calls us to be school counselors and equity leaders for all. And so that means making sure we're aware of which students are feeling microaggressions, disparities, not getting the same opportunities to take certain classes. That's on us as school counselors, and that's doing equity work.
Yeah, Derek, can I jump in for a second? So when you talk about why the need to have this conversation, and if you're trained under the ASCA national model, which I know every state and every school counselor isn't, but if you are trained under the ASCA national model and you think about those themes that are related with the ASCA national model, right? So there's leadership and there's systemic change and all of those things, then we're almost obligated. We have a responsibility to make sure that we are meeting the needs of all students. And if you look at any of the documents that ASCA puts out, they talk about diversity, they talk about social justice and advocacy, they talk about how we are to provide services for all students based upon their need. So school counselors are almost obligated. They can't shy away from these hard conversations. They can't shy away from dealing with certain populations. And there's one quote that I came across that I think is fitting for this. I don't remember who said it, but it said, you can't teach Black children if you don't address the systemic issues or the injustices that go behind it. And so I think it's the same thing in the counseling world. It's hard to counsel children if you don't know who they are, where they come from, what their situations are. And I think that speaks to this conversation that we're having today.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Rutledge. So one of the first steps is addressing the silence, and I'll hand it over to Dr. Ortman to get us started.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Well, like I mentioned before, I'm privileged to be here, and again, not the expert, but I think as a white person, I identify as a white female. And, Minnesota, I'm from rural Iowa. There's a little background. I grew up in small town Iowa, and getting here and seeing the changes that are needed. I've been bombarded all weekend with so many emotions and feelings. And I know a lot of my colleagues, my white colleagues have too, like of the quick posting on Facebook, the quick, Blackout Tuesday yesterday, there's all these quick responses, like we have to do something, we have to do something. And I think the biggest thing is like, yes, we need to do something. And I'm speaking about me and myself, and I think there's a lot of shame about being white, or people saying like, I'm ashamed to be white, or not all whites. Like, we talk about being uncomfortable. One of my biggest points, I think, is like, it's not about us as white people right now. It's not about us. It's not about having, having someone explain or make things feel better for us. And it's okay to feel uncomfortable. I think about committee to talk about race, like accepting your anti-racism is not the solution to the problem, but it's a recovery program really that will last a lifetime. We've changed so much in education. My background's in education. We've talked about multicultural education. Now it's social justice. And then we use the word equity a lot. And so I think now it's like, it's not about, checking that box, which I'll get to in a second, but it's really just about looking at this as a lifetime process that we need to be in this. It's not just in this moment because of what happened to George Floyd or what happened, 4 years ago with Philando Castile. It can't just be a 2-week, we feel bad and then we move on. The biggest thing I think I'm seeing is something, experiencing it, absorb it, let it change you. Like I've been working with lots of supervisees and students, like it's all about kind of experiencing and feeling all of it. Like it's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay. Don't turn to your persons of color colleagues and say, make me feel better. That's not their job. And we've been talking as a group too, like it's about being humble and showing humility. It's like being a witness to all this and not the martyr. I use the quote, it's not about you a lot right now. And we're all counselors, so we know it's not about us. That's our counseling work. That's our basics, like, do no harm. I think about like, it's not about you. I think of people in my life and especially myself, like I've taken 5 graduate classes. Like I've taken 5 graduate classes in multicultural education. I'm like, I should have this figured out. I do not have it figured out. I do not. I'm the first one to admit it, just like this webinar, you can't just check this box. Well, I did my cultural learning today. Check, I'm done. I'm going to email my principal. Maybe I'll get a PD point for this or whatever, what you may need to do anyway, go for it. However, it's not about us. It's not about you. It's not about me. Spend some time looking at history. I was a history major. It's like, look at the critical eye of how we got to this point, how this powder keg has erupted. Like, what are the events that happen? And then look at how changes happen. I used the example yesterday about the women's movement. We're 100 years ago, women got the right to vote. 100 years ago, 100 years a month ago, and like they had to convince all their male counterparts, all their males in their life to vote to give them the right. So it took major change. It took, and then we're still not equal as women. So look at that, impact that history has. Learn about how laws and policies are made in your schools. Know who your school board members are. Get to know them. Advocate with them. Know how changes are made in your school district, how property taxes impact districts. I think about the lifetime process. It's not a box to check. And I'll be the first to admit, I was under the impression through my grad programs and through my learning and through my white privilege, I just want to, I'm doing good. I got this figured out. I feel it. I'm not a racist. I have friends. I do this. And it's not about that. It's not to make you feel comfortable. It should be a constant feeling, because that's our privilege right there, that we feel uncomfortable. It's not like persons of color. They live with that every single day. That's what I've been hearing. I don't know. I don't know their expression. So things you can say, just like you said, any human being in pain is what I'm learning is say, I'm sorry. Say, I see you. Process your feelings on your own, with your family, with your friends. Struggle with it. Struggle. Like we ask our clients or students we work with to struggle with those emotions and those feelings. Be part of that. Do the work. The last little piece I want to mention with allies, because as a white person, I do have power and I do have privilege. I do know how the system works. I know if I go into school system, I know what 504s are, IEPs. I know how to get my students into AP classes. I know how to work the system. I know where the money goes. I know how to make changes. So be an ally for your colleagues, your community members of color. Guide discussions to the topic of racism at the district and state level. My students are on the line right now. They know I love data. Show the data. Show the data, then show here's what we're going to do about it. Be the leader in that way. Redistribute the power and elevate people of color in leadership roles. Show them the way. Give up some of your power so that they can be elevated. And it is hard. And someone's like, thank you for being honest. Yeah. We have to be honest. We've been, the privilege, I can unfriend people I don't like what their political views are. I can unfriend that. That's part of my power and privilege. So now is the time to have those hard conversations with our friends and our families to engage that. I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues too, because I want them to jump in here too about it.
Oh, thanks, Dr. O. Go ahead.
I'll say that, over the past couple of days, there's been a lot of discussions, a lot of chatter about responses to this or lack thereof. And, I want to say to piggyback on Marguerite's points, silence says something, right? Inaction says something. And so from a person of color, if there isn't a response, then people read into that. And, they could read negatively into that. But I just want people to understand that it's time out for remaining silent. It's pretty much. And so that we have to be able to become vocal, whether you're a person of color or whether you're a white ally, it doesn't matter, because we need all of the, and we'll talk about allies a little bit later and how we're moving past even allyship. But anyway, silence matters. So it speaks volumes, inaction speaks volumes.
And I'll add just to that, and I think we're going to touch on this, so not to be redundant, but I've been asking over the last few days, different groups that have approached me or different people that I've had conversations with, why now? They're so adamant about, well, we need to do something. And I ask them right back, and I'm not trying to be negative, but I ask, why now? And as I've had these conversations, I found myself giving them answers of, if you're telling me that you're just frustrated and that, through the pandemic, unfortunately, you've had one mode of communication being social media in general as a construct. And through that mode of communication, you have been bombarded with essentially the truth, and you can't escape it. And the evidence is so paramount that you are at a breaking point, then that's fine. And own that, because there's been so many, and I think Derek's going to touch on this maybe in the next 2 slides. There's been such a history of this. Recent, many years ago, does not matter. But at some point, we have to reflect on, we did not have action like this when Trayvon Martin passed away. This is not the first young Black man to say, I can't breathe, and Eric Garner. So we have opportunities that we had missed previously. And we said that we were, and there was, and I think I've seen it in the chat, the idea of lip service. And so if this is truly going to be a breaking point of acceptable and appropriate behaviors and how to protest and move things forward, then we have to be true about it. And we have to think through what our next action steps are going to be. And Marguerite was very honest with what she shared, and I appreciate that. and the conversations that we need to have. And I know we'll mention it later, but I just wanted to share that point of, it's okay that if this was your moment of clarity, you're woke now, as they sometimes say, this is that opportunity to then be different moving forward, as Derek emphasized.
Yeah, thanks, colleagues, for sharing that. I think also too, let's think about students' perspectives. If this incident happens in school and you're a student of color, and not even student of color, imagine what messaging gets sent to students of color if your school does not address this. That's their identity, that's who they are. But also your staff of color sitting there like, oh, like, what are we gonna do? Are we gonna have a conversation about this? If you don't bring it up, it's like, oh, you just sweep it under the rug. We dance around it. And that's the messaging, that's the pattern that students begin to understand. Like, oh, when issues of race come up, they'll get swept under the rug, or this will die down in a couple of weeks. We'll focus on something else. And your students of color, they see this as another traumatic pattern, another trigger. Like, yep, this happened again. Oh, that's right. No one's going to say anything. And so understanding how that buildup leads to a lot of pain and hurt. And even as a staff of color, when I've had major racial incidents happen in schools I'm at, it hurts when there's not a response from my colleagues. That's one of the worst things you can do is not say something. It bothers students. It bothers staff. It bothers the people in your community because you feel invisible. You feel like my pain isn't being validated right now. So I think that's why we have to address this silence. It can be hard, but we have to address it. Thanks, friends. So now leading into some other components of addressing race. And I want to give a little bit of history of Minnesota so that folks understand the racial climate here. In Minnesota, this isn't just a new hot button news flash in the pan situation. I've been living here in the Twin Cities for my entire life. And I've lived in Minneapolis for most of my life. And I've experienced a lot of microaggressions. I'm working through my distrust with police because I have had far more negative experiences with police than positive. And so here's a quick history of Minnesota, and these are situations where people of color have been killed by law enforcement. Tysel Caprice Nelson, that was December 1st, 1991. Jamar Clark, that was in North Minneapolis. I was at North High when that happened and watched how it impacted our students right down the street from our school. Philando Castile, July 6, 2016, in St. Paul, at Roseville area. That is where he was murdered by a cop. And then now George Floyd. So these are the instances that you hear about that have made national news. But as an African-American man living in Minnesota, I can tell you there's far more of these stories that I have experienced and friends that I connect with have experienced. And it gets heavy and it hurts when it's ignored. So now for my educator friends, I need you to take a second and look at this, because this is here in Minnesota in our schools. I have been committed to doing the work of supporting students in schools after a major racial incident. And so these are also the background piece of information to know about race relations in Minnesota. Look at the nature of some of the events, look at the schools, and I made this list just on a quick search of high schools in Minnesota. I didn't even do middle school or elementary.
I was going to ask, we have a lot more than that, and we have a really low elementary school counseling population too, so we know things aren't being reported or being handled like in the past, so people are sweep things on their rug. The news is showing that, so they're only showing us kind of what we want to see, and I'm sure some of my Minnesota colleagues in here going, whoa, I didn't know that about that school or that high school, because of our history of, like, you know, we, as opposed to do no harm, it's like do not report. So again, it's something to ponder too, that this isn't comprehensive, and I'm sure it's not comprehensive for other states represented here too, what we know is going on in schools.
And this is happening nationally. And so it's important for folks to see. I want to make sure we see the connection between students are having these experiences, these thoughts, these race habits developed in school. They don't become adults and all of a sudden they're doing those things. Those racist thoughts and posts and ideas and conversations, as they get older and when conflict happens, turn to racist actions, and then it turns into, as we're seeing, death of people from underrepresented populations. So as you see this, know that this is information that students are seeing. They're aware. They're learning some of these things going on. And they need to have us address these issues with them.
So I think to Derek's point, that I think what we understand is this conversation is not just about Floyd. This conversation is about so much more. It's about history. It's about systemic practices and policies and procedures. It's about the long laundry list of incidents that are occurring in our schools that may or may not be addressed. And so you saw Minnesota's list, but think about your own state and the incidents that you know about and the incidents that you may not know about, right? And all of that leads to this idea of trauma. So there's so many layers to this that is traumatic for students, that's traumatic for educators of color and just people of color in general, right? And so you think about what's happening in the Black community and the impact that it has on our students. And so this particular conversation is not about, okay, how am I going to go and do trauma-informed care? We only have an hour. There's no way to do that. But it's about more of an awareness of the trauma and how it impacts our students. And so what they're experiencing in their homes and what they're experiencing in their communities are going to make their way into the school building, right? And even though we don't know what the fall is going to look like, we have to be prepared. That's that proactive piece, right? Because we know it's going to show up in your hallways. We know it's going to show up in your classrooms. So we have to be proactive in preparing for that. If you follow social media, if you follow the news, you're already seeing how students are reenacting Floyd's murder, how they are posting racist comments, and students are seeing this. For example, my own children, they watch the news here and there, and they're not on Facebook or anything, but they get it through TikTok, they get it through Instagram or whatever other platform they're on, because they're coming to me and I'm like, how do you know this? So they're seeing this. And so we have to understand the trauma and keep that in mind and understand that we need to find ways to decrease re-traumatization, right? So when we talked about keeping silent, that's re-traumatizing for students. When students come to school and they have issues and it's not being addressed, that leaves the door open for re-traumatization, right? When there is a lack of empathy from the faculty and the staff at the school, that leaves the door open for re-traumatization, right? We understand that, there are going to be some individuals in the school building who do lack empathy. There are going to be some individuals in the school building who do not believe that Black lives matter, right? And so sometimes we as school counselors have to stand in the gap for those individuals, because at the end of the day, all of our students need support. And if you are in this work for the right reasons, you know that it is our duty and our responsibility, right, to support these students. But you have to understand the layers of trauma that is represented in this particular situation. Another thing that we have to think about is what I call forced interventions. And what do I mean by forced interventions? One, I mean services that students aren't ready for, right? So I teach my students that their interventions need to be unique and need to be based upon student need, right? So what Derek does in Minneapolis might not look like what Bobby does in Virginia Beach. Why? Because the populations are different, the needs are different, the students are different, right? And so as a school counselor, you're looking at the needs of your building and you're creating your interventions around that. It is the same situation here, right? You have to have the right intervention at the right time for the right students, right? And so it's okay to be selective about the resources that you use and the services that you provide. It's okay to take a moment and be proactive and plan that out a little bit before you put these interventions on students. Because some students are going to come into your buildings prepared and equipped to handle it, and there are going to be some students who aren't. And you have to know the difference. So you have to know your audience and who you're working with. And then the second reason I say forced interventions, because back to the conversation about school counselors not being prepared, we can't offer services that we're not prepared for, right? That we're not equipped to handle. So take some time and educate yourself, right? Learn about what resources there are, learn about what services you can provide, and be prepared to do so. And so it's not about, doing things off the cuff, but being intentional about the work that we do, because again, we're trying to decrease, mitigate, or eradicate this idea of re-traumatization for our students. The other piece of trauma is this, and I want to be very intentional about this. We also have to think about our school counselors of color, right? So we're talking about the needs of our students. We're talking about how we can support them, where we're all going through the same thing right now, right? So it's traumatic for everybody. So even our school counselors of color. And how are you dealing with this? Are you being transparent and authentic about how it's impacting you? Are you able to go to your colleagues and say, I'm struggling right now. You know, this stuff, it's heavy. You know, I need to take a break. Are you able to go to your administrators and say, you know, I need a timeout, you know, I need to step back. And is there somebody else that can fill in for a moment? And I think that's okay, because a lot of times as school counselors, we act as the superheroes in the situations. And so we're always called on to be the helper. And sometimes we need to help ourselves. And I think this is one of those instances, because we're being impacted just as much as the students are. So I think it's okay that we take a break and take a look at, you know, what this trauma looks like, not only for our students, but also for our school counselors of color. And so when you think about, I mentioned the Ask a National model a little bit earlier, when you think about leadership and advocacy, collaboration, and systemic change, we are called to those actions. And if not now, I don't know when would be a better time for us to do that, right? And so you got to work through the current climate, but it's not just the current climate, it's all those layers underneath. And so this is an example of what I mean. If you have a faulty foundation and you try to build a house on that faulty foundation, what's going to happen? The house is not going to be solid. You're going to have issues, you're going to have problems. We need to fix the foundation, right? And it's going beyond this particular conversation. It's going beyond Floyd's situation and some of the others. It's systemic, it's historical, and we have to understand that. So I know I'm taking a lot of time, but I really want you to understand this idea of trauma. So I want to leave you with a couple of things. One is, please educate yourself, right? Know the historical underpinnings that are going into why we're calling this a pandemic, right? On top of COVID-19, there are other pandemics that are going on at the same time, right? So educate yourself and know what the history is. Know yourself. Take time for some reflection and some introspection. You know how it's impacting you. You don't want to wait till you get into a group or individual meeting and all this stuff starts coming up for you, right? As counselors, we're taught that we need to work on our own stuff first, right? So know that about yourself, and then don't be silent, right? Address the issues, be respectful, be thoughtful, be intentional about the work that you're gonna do with students, have a plan moving forward, and then never stop advocating. I think Bobby said it, or somebody said it already. This isn't just a one-time conversation. This isn't just a one-time thing, because unfortunately, there's been too many instances and we don't know what's yet to come. And so trauma is being reinforced on a daily basis. And so we can't stop this process. This actually is just the beginning. So I think I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, because I could keep going.
Thanks for sharing. Oh, go ahead. And then we can get to the next one.
I just want to ask, I was looking through the comments that people were checking too, and I just wanted to be clear too, like people are asking, like, what about our white students who are feeling the trauma from this? Or what about, I got an email this morning about, what about police officers' children, And I think the deal is like addressing the silence. Again, it's not about you, it's not about that, it's addressing with everyone. Don't just go to your students of color and ask those questions, like, how are you doing? You ask all your students, like, if you want to see a teachable moment, then you teach, like, and you educate, you console, you have those moments. And I think Marsha did a great point about talking about supporting our colleagues of color, like, really important too, that we don't make sure that they don't have to be the leaders on this. We as a white individual, I can lead this change. I don't have to look to Derek in Minnesota and say, Derek, take over, you're a Black man, you be in charge. I don't have to do that. Right, Derek?
Yeah, well, it gets exhausting, especially here in Minnesota. I know I'm speaking to my counselors that are usually the only ones in their district, or definitely usually the only ones in their building. It gets exhausting. I'm tired, y'all. This is hard. Trying to navigate the emotions of our students, and then also navigate the system of not feeling like things are being done in a swift manner. But then manage my own emotions. This is my city that I grew up in, the Target that's burnt down. That's where we'd go every week as a family. So we need help. We need the support. And that's how we have a stronger team. So we need to take care of each other. And this is trauma. It's hard. And I'm ready to start being real with y'all. Systemic barriers in school counseling. Let's go. So I showed you the list of events here in Minnesota. We saw the events nationally. And so I think we got to start doing this work. And it starts with removing the barriers at the school level. And this starts with your school leadership. If you're in a school right now, your school leadership did not put something out or address it with the staff or reach out to the staff of color, that's a problem. Not just staff of color, all staff, and address this hurt. You have to make sure that you're seeing this as something that is real. Leaders sometimes say, oh, we don't have a direction, we don't know what to do, or they give vague responses. That has to stop. That's part of the issue. You're the leader, you set the tone. So I'm talking directly to admin folks, I'm talking to principals, district leaders. Have the initiative to do this work, especially if you're putting on your district statement, we do equity, we do diversity. Don't sit there and admire having the students, the bodies in your building, but not support their minds and their trauma and their experiences. Don't brag about just having them there. Integrate, hear, care about how students of color are feeling and navigating this. Teach your white students how to have these conversations. And I think it's important to have representation in your leadership. Make sure that you have leaders of color in your admin. Be proactive about it. Don't worry about what the community is going to say. It's one thing to say, hey, we have people of color on our team, but when you have leaders in your building, it feels like you're going from being a guest to actually belonging. Like, I belong to be here. I'm not just a guest. Like, I'm just, oh yeah, we got that person of color here. No, admins, value what we have to say. Next, I want to talk to our school counseling leadership. If you're a school counselor listening to this right now, if your department has not responded, if your admin has not responded to you, you need to be proactive. Don't wait for admin to tell you what to do. Don't wait for their comments. And don't do that, because admin doesn't know what they're doing. Here in Minnesota, some of our largest districts have not responded. And that hurts. That's hard. If you're the largest district in Minnesota and you have not put anything out to students when there's a national event going on in our town, that's not proactive counseling. So we need to make sure that you're ahead of the game, that you're reaching out to students. Don't wait a week after and send out an email and say, how's everyone doing? And sorry about the event. Say what happened. A murder happened in our city. Make sure you let students know there's someone that looks like you, a person of color that got murdered again in our city. How are you feeling? That's what you have to do as a school counselor. Don't sit silent. Don't feel awkward that you're going to be the first one to put race in the space. And that can be hard. If you've never initiated a conversation about race with your students, you have to do it now. It's smacking us in the face. And I know it can be hard. We don't have a fire drill plan. We don't plan for this 3 times throughout the year, but maybe we should, because there's a higher chance of race incidents happening than a fire breaking out in your school. You saw those incidents. There's not that many fires that happen in schools, but you best believe there's going to be a race incident happening in your school. And we're here to support students around that. And I think it's important to be mindful. What did your school counseling staff look like? Do you have school counselors of color in your program? And not just have them there, support them, build them up. Again, in Minnesota, this is one of our biggest issues. Our largest school district has 1 counselor of color out of 51. You know, a lot of the surrounding school districts, same thing. That contributes to some of these problems, some of these issues on how students are being supported. So it's important. Talk to your school departments. Be mindful to proactively hire people from underrepresented populations to reflect and be a mirror for your students of color, but also for your white students to see someone who is an awesome support, build a relationship. I know in my experience, I've had white students where they'll share, you're the first person of color I've ever had in education that isn't a security, that isn't working in our lunch room. They're like, or isn't a coach. They're like, you're my school counselor. And I love building that relationship and breaking down those barriers and boundaries and negative stereotypes that they may believe. I want to make sure too that it's important. We talked about advocacy. I know the importance of white allies doing this work in our team. Jim Bierma, he's my mentor. He is a rock star. He's helped me get to the position I'm in now. He's looked out for me. He's helped me feel like I belong. He created space for me to be here. And some of the things he's done was make it intentional to hire counselors from underrepresented populations in Minnesota. Minneapolis has a third of our counselors are counselors of color. And that's very unique in Minnesota, where we have districts with one counselor out of the whole district. So it's important to have advocates and leaders like Jim. The next piece that I have to address is counselor bias. Counselors, we have it. It shows up in a variety of ways. Speaking to right now, the scheduling process. Counselors, we struggle with schedule bias. I do. If I can be transparent, when I was at Champlain Park, I was scheduling a female student, and I knew she came by and asked, "Hey, what classes are available?" And I was like, "Hey," I looked through the list, but I skipped over some classes. And then she said, "Hey, Mr. Francis, I thought auto tech was open. I just had a friend get into auto tech, but you didn't call out auto tech." And I sat there like, oh, shoot. I didn't make reference to auto tech because I had my bias thinking as a female, she doesn't want to take auto tech. No, she doesn't want that. We have to be mindful of that bias that we have as counselors, especially when it comes to adding students to higher level courses. Their course, that's their opportunity. That's their chance to be in those higher level courses. That's what the colleges are looking for. If your school has huge gaps in the students of color in the higher level courses, you're impacting your kids' opportunity. How dare you do that? We have to hold that in our heart. Like, if I put you in this class and support you, you have an opportunity to go on to a solid 4-year school. I have to be mindful that as I'm talking about scheduling, MESA, the reason and I'm particular about who I partner with. I vary, but what I'm really proud about MESA is that that's the work they do. They are intentional about looking at the data and helping schools with their scheduling. They look at the data and they work with many different school districts, particularly Houston they work with as well. But they look at the data. From the data that they look at, they see that there's times where 25% of students are scheduled and put into the wrong class day one. Also, their data shows that 16% of high school students had multiple errors on their transcript. And then 70% of those students, there's a 70% chance that students impacted with schedule errors are students of color. So you have to do the equity work even in your scheduling. And so that's some of the things that we've done to lead up to this point to cause some of these errors and some of these systemic barriers in counseling. I'll wrap up because I am getting really excited to just keep sharing this work with you all, but we have to have empathy. We have to address how students are feeling in your community, how they're feeling in your school. We have to keep educating ourselves. That 3-credit class you take in grad school is not enough. You're not done. You don't just check the box off. You have to have the humility to say, I want to learn more. I want to support students more. I want to have this passion in my heart because these incidents are happening all the time. So make sure that you're connecting with your team and moving forward from hearing some of these things to address the systemic issues going on in your school. Anyone have anything they want to share to that?
Yeah.
I would say, oh, go ahead.
I have 3 points, and then I'll let you jump in, Bobby, but 3 points. One is language matters, right? So be direct, right? Call a thing a thing. You know, it's not necessarily about race, it's about racism, right? It's about police brutality. Don't shy away from the words because you're trying to sugarcoat or trying to filter. No, language matters, and we need to be direct in this particular case. We talked a lot about the need for school counselors of color, and I want to say that we did a webinar last month on recruitment and retention of school counselors of color. So for my administrators on here and for my counselor educators on here and those who are in positions of hiring, please go take a look at that webinar because we talked a lot about why there is the need, what universities could be doing, what school systems could be doing to recruit and retain school counselors of color. My third point is school counselors, you must educate yourself. We still have those who operate under a guidance model, and that is not okay, right? We are not guidance counselors, we are school counselors. If you were not trained under a school counseling model, it is up to you to go and get trained. It is up to you to take a class. It is up to you to go to your professional organization's professional development and make sure that you are up with the profession.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. Oh, go ahead, Bobby.
No, I was gonna say we can go to the next slide. I have a feeling we're gonna keep rolling through. I was looking
Cool.
at time.
And you know what? I hope some folks will go into overtime bonus coverage if I love overtime in games.
Yeah.
It's like, oh,
We-
overtime, we get extra basketball. So
We're going there.
I hope we go into overtime because, you know, all I got is lunch. I could put off my lunch. Bobby, go ahead with some proactive approaches.
So we're going to touch on a few things. One, I appreciate the chat. I've been trying to keep up as these things pop up really quickly across our screens for like less than a half a second. So what's been occurring in the chat from what I could see is a conversation in regards to all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter. And I want to, say how that is one of the difficult conversations to have in person. So yes, you are engaging, you are literally exemplifying, putting it into action what one of these conversations down the road after today might look like. Someone saying, well, all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter. So I'm not going to go down that, but I'll say this. I don't think anyone who took the time to register for this webinar believes that all lives do not matter. I don't think that. I think all of us believe all lives matter. To the points that were made in the chat, the difference is this, and there are a lot of analogies that I know have been floating around on social media and other, we'll just say, communication channels. There's a difference between all lives matter and all lives mattering as much. And I would argue that historically speaking, Black Lives Matter, specifically the lives of Black males, have not mattered as much. So in that, there is work to be done to address the lives of Black people, period. We can then say people of color. We can extend that to other subgroups. No one's saying no to that. The issue being, again, historically speaking, on a large scale, there is ample evidence telling you that Black lives do not matter as much. All lives do matter. It's a matter of what attention we want to put in those different, I'll say, where we want to put our focus and where we want to put our time and our attention and our efforts. So it's about students, yes. So with that said,
any chance I could say something quick around that?
Please.
I've heard that response a lot of times from people, educators, especially people, and it's usually my white colleagues who will say something like that. Never to my face, but it's usually on the computer, 'cause I'm sure that's easier. And so they'll say white lives matter. And so here's how I want, because at the end of the day, or they'll say all lives matter. And here's the thing, all lives do matter. All lives were created the same, we're humans, we're connected. And so here's what is hard when we hear all lives matter. It's one of the things where it's a humanity thing. And this is why I'm trying to share with people, this is a humanity issue. We watched a human, it doesn't matter what race, have a knee on his neck for 8.5 minutes. So if we're sitting here and you all were watching videos, someone put their knee on my neck for 8.5 minutes. As a human, I would imagine after 2 minutes, you would say something. And here's the thing, a lot of times people are disconnected from their hurt because they don't have any connections to people of color. But had that been a dog being killed like in that manner, there's a whole lot of people that have been like, how dare they do that to that dog? That's inhumane. Don't see it like, don't do that. We have to make sure we're considering these incidents. That's a hard incident for people to see. It's having that trauma of like that and realize the historical piece of this. This isn't the first time it's happened. And you know what? I want to be honest. If this was happening to my white peers, I would need to step up and say, you know what? That's not a fear that I have to go around with, but my peers of color are telling me this is something going on. So how dare you not have humility and say, okay, if you're saying that this issue is happening way more to people in your community and to your friends and family, I need to have the humility and hear you and say, you know what, I want to support you. I want to be there for you. Because if you tell a student of color, well, all lives matter, you ask them, you know that's not going to feel good. And I'm telling you now, they will not appreciate that. They'll want you to say, you know what, thank you for hearing me. That's having empathy.
I think, a great analogy, I think of like grief counseling. Like if a child is coming to you and say, I have a loss, and you're saying, well, that's too bad. Like we all have losses. And that's like, we can't do that. We can't pick and choose what topics we talk about as counselors. We have to realize that this is a topic. This is one of the things you can't shy away from.
Yes. And that those are the conversations again, because we're all going to process that differently. I go back to, we might be on various, I don't want to say sides, but along the continuum, and we're all going to have our understanding and belief of it. The beauty of it is, if we're willing to engage in the conversations about where we're coming from, we are moving the work forward. It's not my goal to change your mind. It's my goal for you to understand my perspective. Those are two different goals in a conversation. I'm not going to tell a student at the end how they need to feel about the loss they experienced or the trauma that they've seen or experienced. Not my goal, but I want to understand what they're going through and see that it's going to be an issue for them. So with that said, you know, something I shared with my school counselors yesterday, as a matter of fact, via email, you know, your readiness for this work is going to vary as well. So many times it's been said today about, you know, reflecting on your feelings. I believe, I'm going to paraphrase essentially the email I said to them. And I did point out introspection. I do believe introspection is where it begins and it moves to outreach and advocacy. With that introspection, take time to reflect on how you're feeling. Marsha mentioned self-care. That is an example of that. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? List those out. You know, question yourself, you know, why do I feel that way? You know, why am I saddened by this? Yes, there was a loss of life, but why am I so moved by what I've seen? You know, what have I experienced in my life to lead me to feel or believe these things? At that point, outreach begins. You should call someone that you know, a friend of yours, and it may turn into an event session, but at that point, you're at least starting to process your emotions, you're processing your feelings, you're getting an idea, and in that same conversation, you're going to get feedback from someone that you know and trust. And then you can have some open conversations, perhaps learn a little bit about your friend that you didn't know, or just get a chance to feel validated by speaking to someone that you know and trust. Third, take that same approach as a counselor with that background that you have and use those active listening skills and call someone, reach out to someone, student included, that you know, but maybe you don't know as well. And you're not calling them, and I want to be very clear with this when it comes to privilege, we are not calling them because we think they need help. We're not calling them to say, oh, I know you must have gone through a tough time. Let me offer you this assistance. That's not what this is. This is not your chance or place to do that. However, it's a way to gain perspective from a different person. Ideally, the challenge would be to do that with someone who has a different racial background than your own. As you repeat that third step multiple times, and I think I just saw this word in the chat, the mindsets start to change. Your perspective begins to change. And with that different perspective of, you know what, I didn't realize that a Black gay man received this information differently from somebody else, or that a Latina, as she watched this, thought about someone in her life from a different part of her experience. And you take those various levels of understanding of different groups of people, and now you should start looking for professional development. What PD do you need? What gaps did you notice? What biases were checked? What prejudgments were you making that have been not corrected, but at least challenged by what you've heard from other people? I'll be very open about the difference between a prejudgment and a bias. Prejudgment is my daughter walks into the kitchen telling me she hates that hot thing in the corner, that being a stove. She doesn't know what a stove is. But when she tells me that she hates it, that makes zero sense. That's a prejudgment. Now, if she walks over to it and she gets burned by it, now she's learned that, you know what, maybe I shouldn't touch the stove. She may now have a bias against stoves and for a reason. Same thing, and apply it to a real life situation for myself. I was driving in a certain southern city, going to give a presentation, and I found myself thinking on those rural roads, if I was driving this time of day at night, so 2 p.m. became 2 a.m., and a truck with a certain sticker on the back of it asked me if I needed help, nah, dude, I'm good. Yeah, that's a bias. Why? Because I feel as if that would be a poor decision in that instance. It could have been the nicest white man in that truck, but my learned experience tells me that might be a poor decision. That is something I'm struggling with. That's a conversation that I consistently have with people to get a better understanding of how I too cannot look at all people the same. So with that said, my PD has been, how can I learn more about different groups that I know nothing about? How can I then translate that into skills that I've learned as a counselor, from active listening, being non-judgmental, most importantly, showing compassion to those I do not understand or know as well. And with that, now with that expertise as school counselors, we can start looking at school-wide supports, small groups, individual supports, whether that's classroom instruction, And this is not a one-stop, oh, I did my 2 lessons in English 12 and we've addressed this issue. That's not going to work. So these are programs that you're going to discuss, and you're going to challenge your school leadership, and you're going to challenge your counseling leadership, and you're going to challenge your school board to support different things that allow this work to happen on a large scale. Small group, if we're looking at tiered interventions of support, multi-tiered systems of support, small groups now kick in, and there's multiple small groups to host. There are mixed groups. There are groups of individual genders or sexes. There are individual groups that might occur of subsets. All white, all black, doesn't matter. But you're going to need to meet the needs that manifest in your building. Derek mentioned this very well. If you know that you have students who have felt marginalized because they are a small number in your building, it's okay to reach out to them. That's called a targeted intervention. Marcia mentioned that before too. And for those who then need individual support, as you gathered your data, shout out to Marguerite on data, then you can then move forward with building those individual sessions for the students who you know need it. That's a pre-assessment, post-assessment. Where am I ranking my feelings? Where am I ranking my thoughts? I now have something quantitative and qualitative telling me I gave support where it was needed. Moving forward to sustainable change, we got to look at curriculum. You can't sit here and say that we have anti-racist curriculum. We don't. And if we're not going to have comparable, and I don't want to use the word equitable in this instance, but comparable representation of different groups as we study history, as we look at an all-black cast of a Shakespeare play, as we look at different subject areas that allow us to learn more about different inventions from people of color. Now we're looking at constant reminders across an entire K-12 curriculum that might exact sustainable change, because I'm changing, back to Piaget, I have to accommodate and assimilate a different image of a black male that I never saw before. We need to do that. There's this touchy part of multicultural SEL, and I'll leave that open to others from our group. We had a great discussion earlier, but that affects your school climate and your school culture. If you have a multicultural social emotional learning program, elementary, extremely important, where you are treating or teaching those others how to treat one another, we are moving things forward. That's where the common decency and the all lives, all of that kicks in, because humanity, and Derek said it great, that's where we have to be with each other. And if we're not there, we're never going to be there. So from a school climate, school culture standpoint, moving that to subject area, and I think we've all said it, this is an ongoing multi-level advocacy and evaluation process. You need to be looking at yourself. You need to be looking at your school. You need to be looking at your school division. You need to be looking at your state. We need to look at the country. It goes from small to big. And if we're not going back and evaluating where we are, and not just in the first 3 months back, but in the 8 to 9 to 12 months out, did we have any growth in any of those areas? Then we have done something different from this instance that we had never done before. And that's part of the challenge that I know our panelists have discussed today. And I hope that we can accept that and move forward as we try to make great, not just good, and better does not mean good, that we can try to make great things happen from an unfortunate incident.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing. I know it's approaching noon and some folks are needing to trickle out. Know that we will have this recorded, and we hope that you continue listening, because we have some more information to keep sharing. And you touched on a couple of things. I think I am so proud of the counselors in Minneapolis, because one of our elementary counselors, and unfortunately we're going to be losing our elementary counselors next year, which bums me out. So we need counselor advocacy. Our elementary counselor, Caitlin, she did each of those tiered approaches, and she used the humility to say, I'm a white female. I'm trying to figure out how to do this work. And she's doing it. She's being proactive. She met with students, had individual sessions, set up group sessions, and just listened, had that empathy, learned from the students. And then also Debbie Nelson, our lead counselor, she was attentive to the needs. She did a needs assessment for what resources families needed. Families needed some basic necessities, because we're in COVID and some families don't even have food or diapers. So Debbie was out there supporting our students by doing a drive at Northeast Middle School, where families were coming in and getting the resources they need. So be mindful of the intersectionality we have with COVID-19 and racism. There's a lot of need in our community right now, and using these tiered approaches will be helpful in making sure you're reaching all students. Was there anything else we wanted to share on this page before we moved on?
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on a couple of things that Bobby said, because I think he said it well, that our school counselors now need to go and lead, right? So despite the perceptions that teachers may have, despite what administrators say, you are the leader in the building, and sometimes the biggest advocate that students have. So I don't want you to shy away from that responsibility, right? So I asked a question earlier, if not now, when? And now I ask, if not you, who, right? So you have that responsibility. And so and one of the things I want to hone in on is this idea of comprehensive school counseling program and how vital it is to the outcomes of students, to curriculum, to school divisions in general, right? If all we do is teach our students to read, write, and math, read, write, and do math, right? No shade to history and science and all that, you'll get my point. If all we do is teach them to read, write, and do math, we are failing them, right? So as society becomes increasingly more diverse, our students have to be prepared to interact, to communicate with one another, right? To interact with people who look different than them. And so as school counselors, we have to learn how to embed diversity and social justice into our core curriculum lessons, into our school-wide programming, and so forth, right? In Virginia, we have this thing called 5 C's, right? So we look at critical thinking, creative thinking, communication, collaboration, and citizenship. And so our teachers are supposed to be infusing that into the curriculum. We as school counselors need to be doing the exact same thing, right? Because we have to teach them all those other skills in order to be successful in life when they get out of school. And so that's why it's important, this school counseling program that you implement to your students, racism, prejudiceness, social justice, all of that included, wrapped into one, is vital to the success of your students.
Yes, and not just at the schools that are predominantly students of color. And I say that talking about race is a college and career readiness skill. We have students that are going off to college, and if we're back in the building, they're going to have roommates that are going to be of a different background. And when you're in that, and I don't know how many of you have had these conversations, but having those conversations with your roommates about race, I had to have those, and having to have share your experience. How dare we let students leave high school without and especially if in a high school that has students of color, and you don't have them have the conversation about race. That's stunting their social emotional development. We need to make sure that they don't shut down when topics of race come up, because that's something that students will do, and even adults. So it's the adult social emotional learning of saying, all right, how can I be aware of how I'm responding, the emotions I feel when race comes up? And understand that helping our students develop that. If students come to you, the things that happen in the news, that's happening socially in our community. The race, them being a student of color, that the way they navigate society in their race, that impacts their emotions. So I feel race is a social emotional issue we have to address. When a student is hurting because of something socially and it impacts their emotions, that's social emotional learning we have to teach them. How to navigate that, how to address conflict that are race-based, how to advocate for yourself. Because if not, some students take it and it hurts and it comes out in the wrong way. So be mindful of that background, of what it feels like to be hurt emotionally by race incidents in our society. So and it's in our DNA as school counselors, even in the spelling of counselor, S-E-L is right in there. So we have to address the social emotional domain. Sorry, I just had to, anyway. All right.
Mind's blown. I want to piggyback on what Derek said though, but like you could have a conversation with students doing your SEL program, but you need to be creative. You got to go to your teachers, your high school teachers, middle school teachers, like when they're doing writing classes, reading classes, what are they putting in front of them? Are they having those hard conversations? Can you educate? Can you help your colleagues embrace this talk too? Because it can't just come from us as school counselors. And then we look at systematic, so be creative this summer as you're thinking and planning ahead. How can I embrace this? Where are my allies? Where are the other allies, like educators I work with, other staff members that I can engage these conversations with? We can make a plan that this is something that we do, not just me as a school counselor, but in our school. And I think that as a former teacher, there's many ways that you can embrace that, like collaborate with them. And so just being creative and using this time now to brainstorm and think, how can we do better?
And to that point, and look to where it already exists and use that to your advantage. I have hijacked health and PE like a champ over the years. Social studies is another one. You can't argue that it's not. And so when you tell me that we're supposed to have an expressive poem in English, guess what? We're going to infuse some things in that, and we're going to have some conversations. You can be expressive about diversity just as much as you can be about what you see outside. I would much rather you write an expressive piece about something you've lived, a lived experience, than you giving the teacher giving you the prompt. So there's opportunities, to Marguerite's point, abound from K through 12, CTE, NJROTC, to cooking. It doesn't matter what course it is, you have opportunities.
Thank you, friends.
Curriculum integration, absolutely.
Wow, cool. Thank you, friends. I'm glad we're in this raw emotional space, because this is deep. This is real. I want to pour my emotion out. I don't want to stifle it, because I want to be real, because I know there's probably people out there that are feeling some of these things. So I'm not going to hold back, and we shouldn't. This is the time we have to do this. Allies and accomplices. Who wants to lead it off?
So I think that I was going to lead that off, but I want to say, you know, I'm trying to follow the chat too, like Bobby said, and I want to say that I feel some uncomfortable people in the chat, and I want to say that's okay, right? Because once you become uncomfortable, then to me that signals that you're beginning to think, you're beginning to ask some hard questions, and so that's okay. But Marguerite kind of touched on this idea of allies, you know, at the beginning of the presentation, and we're almost done, so stay with us. She touched on allies, and I want to dig a little deeper in this idea of an ally. And I actually want to move us away from allies to accomplices. And there was one question in the chat, somebody said, is allyship problematic? And the answer to that is no, it's not problematic. But I think I'm gonna help you understand why we're moving away from allyship more to accomplices. But anyway, accountable to advancing the work. So everybody must hold themselves accountable to doing the work when we're talking about being an ally, right? So we have to hold our white counterparts accountable for assisting in, you know, destructuring these systemic practices. We have to hold ourselves accountable to doing the work and so forth. And so we know that we work in collaboration. We don't work in isolation. We work in collaboration with our many colleagues, and we need as much support as we can absolutely get. So we have to hold each other accountable. And so change will not happen until we're all working together to address these issues. So for our allies in the group, it's going to take a certain level of commitment, and it's going to be very uncomfortable at times, right? But if you're truly dedicated to the profession, then you know that we're tasked with providing equitable services to all students, and that we need to act on their behalf, and not just school counselors of colors advocating for students of color, not just white school counselors advocating for white students, but everybody working together that's going to better the outcomes for all students. We have to understand that there is a power imbalance, whether we like it or not, right? These two kind of go hand in hand, the understanding the power imbalance and the using power and privilege for equity. Acknowledging the power and the privilege that you carry and using that to support students of color to combat racism and to change inequitable practices is what we need. Acknowledging it and using it to change the system, right? And then the idea of moving away from allies to accomplices. If you think about what an ally is, that's somebody who supports, that's somebody who may encourage, that's somebody who may be empathetic about the situation, but no, I need an accomplice. I need somebody who is working alongside with me. I need somebody who's going to be in the room with me, at the table, in the conversation, doing the work alongside of us. And that's what's missing with the allyship, is that action piece. And so if you're moving to an accomplice, and sometimes there's a negative connotation to accomplice, you think of like an accomplice to a bank robbery or something. But if you think about it, that person is right there with them, bank with you, right? And so if you put a more positive spin on it, right? We want accomplices in this work. We want somebody that's with us, doing the work, addressing the concerns, working for change, and so forth. So as you reflect on this conversation that we've had today, I want you to reflect on whether you are an ally or whether you are an accomplice. And we need accomplices to continue this work.
Yes, definitely. And I think I'm so glad you shared this because it's important. And I do this inventory of myself because as a person of color, when I go into a building, naturally, the students gravitate to me, the students of color. But I want to make sure that I'm an accomplice for other students who have different things that they're navigating. And I have to be aware of my bias too, because growing up, I did not grow up in an environment where I had gay or lesbian people in my community that I connect with, in my home, or even friends, not until college. And so I had some biases that I had to address so that I don't harm my students and my peers. And so when I'm in schools, it's one thing to be an ally and say, oh yeah, you should go check out GSA. That's the easy one. Or go check out the Black student group, or go check out the Latinx student group. That's one thing. But being an accomplice means I'm coming to the group with you. Oh, what are you guys doing? I'm coming to the event. I'm being in it with you. Don't just send them, or here's the information, let me know how it goes. You have to be proactive in doing the work with them, because it's so easy to say, oh yeah, and defer it to other people. And usually people defer students of color to me because it's easy. Oh yeah, Derek's the counselor of color, go talk to him. No, you build your skills so they can talk to you, and then you can connect with colleagues and they can do that work with you, but don't put it all on the people of color. You have to say, you know what, I'm in this with you. Make an investment and don't worry about, oh, what are people on my team gonna say, or well, am I gonna look? And you have to do that work in your heart if there's bias where you're like, do I really believe in this stuff? Because some folks, it's hitting you in the face. You have to make a stance. And I knew I had to do something too when, at the beginning of COVID, our Asian American friends were experiencing so much discrimination, a ton, because of things that were being said about the coronavirus. And we have to stand in solidarity with our Asian American folks, because I'm not an Asian American person, but my heart has empathy for them because I've experienced discrimination and I know it hurts. So I want to show them my solidarity and say, I'm with you in this. That hurts. Let's talk about it. Let's make sure we're teaching the skills so that students don't say those harmful things. Let me know how we can connect and make sure you all feel affirmed. That's moving from an ally to accomplice. Be there with me. Don't just send me, come with me.
And then add on to that, then you go back to the group of people who are saying those things and you educate them. Like, where is this culture coming from? You know, I think you have to go back again, look at the people who are saying or blaming Asian Americans for the COVID-19. We're blaming, like, all the blame, and go back to how do we really handle conflict in these difficult conversations. I think as a white person, it's hard to, you want to say the right thing. The right thing. I want to say the right thing, but there is no right thing. Make mistakes. Say you're sorry, but don't avoid it. Don't just, like, send them down with that pass, that group. Take that challenge, take that risk, be uncomfortable.
And to that point, Marsha, this is what we discussed right before we started. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Derek, because Marguerite did the great segue into when errors happen. I mean, so, and in that, and I saw a few other things in the chat in terms of the curriculum and things that we can do. I want to clarify a point. I'm really big on terms. And so in my story about being in that one southern state, I want to be clear on, I too made a prejudgment, but it was based on learned experience, which is where then bias comes into play. So I just want to clarify that in terms of how things played out, but also to what everyone just said, in relation to the curriculum and in relation to when errors happen and moving from that ally to accomplice, we are going to make mistakes. As a person, as someone who is from a Panamanian background, speaking to someone who is Black, guess what? I'm gonna make mistakes. I'm gonna say the wrong thing to a Black woman. I'm probably gonna say the wrong thing to a white man. And there are people who say the wrong thing about Latinos to me, not knowing that my mom and dad are both from the Canal Zone of Panama. That's just people make inherent mistakes, owning them, being open to discussing them, learning, saying, you know what, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. Please tell me more. Please let me know how I can best respond to that. To one of the points Derek made, we had a training from an organization based out of Richmond in Side by Side. And Ted Lewis was the gentleman, and I just violated that right then. Ted does not have an identified gender and prefers to be called Ted, not him, not her, it's Ted. And I struggle with that. In that, there's so many approaches that can allow us to meld these things together. And one that I throw out from Christopher M. Dean is reality pedagogy. So regardless of who you are as an instructor, as a counselor, as an educator, there are certain approaches that you can use. I'm just using that one as an example. And there's a great TED Talk on it from Christopher himself, talking about reality pedagogy and how you can take the learned and lived experiences of students and bring them into your classroom so that you can improve upon the R's that we've always discussed in education, especially in regards to relevancy. So just wanted to share that because, again, Marguerite said it, and I appreciate it anytime a white accomplice says that they're open to making mistakes, because you have to, in that fourth bullet down, give yourself the opportunity for forgiveness. And know that going into it, that's just going to happen. We all are going to be there, regardless of what you look like, regardless of your background. And then that part about consulting goes right in line with that. And it ties into what Derek was saying. That means I have to go visit and speak with and learn from the different groups that I do not have a strong understanding of the terms or what I'm supposed to say. The moment you have one person of a different background, you can start having conversations. The only thing I'll say in that, please be careful of not putting the burden on one person to speak for an entire group. And we can all sometimes be guilty of it, but some more groups than others. So just wanted to share that last piece, but feel free, I think, and I'm seeing a lot of people sharing different resources from the chat, but those who are interested in resources, we are all here, and you're going to have our email addresses at the end of this. Please reach out, and we'll have conversations with you. Right. So, and I just wanted to share that piece, but please, everybody else.
Anyone have something to share on AIRS? If not, I got some stuff. Either way, it's up to y'all. Okay, I'll go. Cool. Oh, go ahead.
There are a number of questions, and we see them. And we are running out of time, but I think what we're going to have to do probably for the majority of the questions is address them later. So as a team, we'll take a look at the questions, and whatever we can address, maybe we'll address out through email, or when we post the link to the video, maybe that way, but we know we're not going to be able to address all of your questions, but we appreciate them. Keep them coming, and we'll try to get back to you the best way we can.
I've not seen any of the chat, so I'll go through it after. I'd stick around after this if folks, cause I know someone's like, man, my lunch is getting cold, my chicken's cold, I've been waiting to eat it. I'm a hot food person, so if your food gets cold, either go heat it up now and come back and eat and watch this, or just let it sit for a little bit, cause I hate eating cold food. So, anyways, so AIRS will happen. AIRS happen all the time. It's just bound to happen because none of us are experts in someone else's cultural background, and each individual is unique. So be mindful that AIRS will happen. And here in Minnesota, there's a term called Minnesota Nice. And I'd say that because you have to understand your conflict style. Some people are direct. They're like, hey, I had a conflict, I need to talk to you about it. And some people receive it like, oh, thank you for telling me. Some people get uncomfortable. Some people get defensive. Know your style. If your style is not from humility and understanding and wanting to have the conversation, be aware of that, because you might be jarred when someone tells you that you made a race-based mistake. Ask for forgiveness. We're humans. I make mistakes. I've made plenty of mistakes with students, and they see that, oh, my bad. I didn't mean to say that. Why did I even ask you that? I'm sorry about that. Thanks for telling me. I think it's important to say, I'm sorry, my bad, because sometimes the natural default is you get defensive, and to be so prideful in ourselves to say, well, I've been doing this for 20 years. I know what I'm doing, or no, other students didn't say anything wrong. I think it's important to ask for forgiveness. Next, when you have an error, don't give your cultural resume. Don't say, you know what, I did this youth group in Haiti and I have a lot of black friends, or I dated a black guy in high school. You don't gotta do all that. Don't give your whole resume. You don't have to do that to prove that you've been around people of color, that you're woke. You don't have to do that. Just be yourself. Forgive yourself. Say, you know what, I made a mistake, but you know what, I'm gonna come back tomorrow and do it better. I learned that one. I'm not gonna do that again. And if I see an instance when someone else does it, I'm going to tell them so that they don't make the same mistake I made. And then also, I think it's important to diversify your friend group. And I think that's the next page, but consult with other people, consult with other counselors. I've learned so much from the counselors that I work with in Minneapolis schools because I'm always reaching out to them to talk and for them to give me perspective and to keep me humble around things that I think I know a lot about, where they're like, Derek, you've only been doing this 8 years. Learn from me. So I think it's important that we learn from our colleagues. Anything else from this slide?
Now, I was just going to say, I don't think, one of the things that I teach my students is you're not expected to know everything about everybody, because that's impossible. And so you're going to learn as you go, as you interact with your students and so forth. You're going to learn about culture in that way. But I also think there should be an awareness, a general knowledge about the different populations that you engage with and that you work with. And then we all make mistakes, right? I'm pretty sure I've probably made a mistake on this webinar at some point. And that's okay. We just acknowledge that, we apologize, and we move forward. I think we have to come from a place of genuineness and authenticity, which we've said, throughout this webinar. And I think if we operate from those places, then we'll be okay.
I just added, look at your intentions. What are your intentions? Always go back to intentions. And I think of, like, I'm going to quote The Bachelorette, this is a journey, not a destination. They always say you can't be on a journey or, a game show, but we're on a journey here. That's not a destination. We're working on this together, and it's going to take time, and a lot of time, and be okay with that.
Yeah. As we wrap up, we want this, again, be proactive. Don't leave it at head knowledge. Don't go somewhere and regurgitate this and say, oh yeah, I went to this awesome session, you should check it out. Do something different based on what you heard today, even if it's as simple as one step to say, you know what, please, let's have a conversation as a team about what's going on. Or, hey, we have to prepare for our students when they come back to school. This is going to be something we can work on and talk about and create systems, because it can't be a one-off. So please be proactive. Take time to educate yourself. This is one form of education, is us as counselor colleagues having humility and coming in and talking with each other. But now the internet is wide open. Learn, find some books to read. I know there's resources going out. Connect with us. We want to give you, I would love to share things that I'm reading with you all. Diversify your social group. The reason I share that is because if you're in a state or in a school where you're hearing feedback and your in group is mostly people who look like you, if you don't have people of different backgrounds, you're not getting an authentic experience of what it feels like to be that person. You're getting it from an outsider's view. And then you might also have that in-group bias where your whole group has no clue about the experience of someone else. So it's so important. And I think that's part of the beauty of our world, is that it's diverse and there's people of different backgrounds and there's varieties of things to learn and comprehend and different perspectives. So it's only going to grow you. It's my favorite thing about working with counselors in Minneapolis is because we're diverse. We hear different people's experiences. And it helped me understand some things that I would not have had if I was only in a circle of counselors of color. And then continue to address bias and privilege in your own life. We have to start putting it out there. Be mindful of how we can start with the change in ourselves, things that we do. You can't say you want social justice, can't say you want to do equity work when you are at family functions and you're allowing grandpa to say some off-color things. You can't compartmentalize it. You gotta be, and you can't have these thoughts in the back of your minds about people of different backgrounds, but then show up at school and you're trying to pretend you're the equity lead now. You can't do both. You got to have it all the way through, be authentic. Like, you know what? I saw this go on at the house. I got to talk about it. Have the conversation with your kids. If you're talking about all this at work and you ain't having these conversations at home, you're not going to make change. You're compartmentalizing this. I don't have that luxury. I have to. Your students of color don't have that luxury. So you need to make sure that we're making this a comprehensive approach for our life. Anything else on this slide, or should we get to the, thanks for the folks who have stuck around. And we're excited to keep partnering because this is not a one-off. We would love for you all to keep in touch with us. We're looking forward to doing future professional development, either at colleges and universities or at your district level or for your school building. So if that's something of interest, let us know. And so I'm hoping to connect with Mesa to get information centralized so that if you have requests around that, we can talk, because we've all had opportunities to present at conferences and for school districts, and we feel this information right now is something that we need to continue to push forward. Anything else anyone on here want to share?
I just want to say there was a lot of questions about whether or not it's going to be recorded. It absolutely is. It will be shared out at some point, maybe later today or by tomorrow, but it is recorded. It will be shared out for those who had to leave or for those who could not make it. But one last final point that I want to make is this. We are in the process of revamping what K-12 looks like, right? So due to COVID-19, due to online schooling and hybrid and all, we are in the process of reimagining and rethinking education anyway. Let's go all the way, right? Let's go back and fix those foundations, right? And start building on something solid. Let's go back and take a look at those systemic practices and procedures that have been perpetuating cycles of racism and discrimination. And let's go ahead and get those taken care of and get those fixed so we can all move forward together and better outcomes for students, right? So if not now, when?
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right, well, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you. School counselors, we're in this work together. This is solidarity. And this is one of those conversations where I know some folks are leaving exhausted. Some folks are leaving like, yes, they went there. So wherever you are on this, we're here with you. Connect with us, reach out, keep it going in your building, in your district. We are here to help you support that work. And we desire to just be in connection with you as a partner and helping all of our students from all backgrounds feel included and integrated into school and supported and loved. So thank you so much for your time today. I think I haven't seen any of the questions because I'm on live mode. I don't know if it's show, but if we wanted to stick around for 10 minutes and answer some of the questions, we could. If folks are, should we answer like 2 or 3 of them? Why not? I mean, we're here now.
So can you see the questions, Derek?
Oh.
There's 100 and some.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know there was this many.
219.
I don't really pick one at this point. They're all good questions. I've been trying to read them as we go, and there are a lot of great questions. And
I hope there's a way to save it too.
Yeah, I think we'll do it better if we take time to go through the questions and strategically respond to them. It's going to be extremely hard to pick out.
Okay. Then how about we do that? We'll just send a follow-up email message to everyone, letting them know about how we want to respond, how we'll respond to some questions, and how we can stay connected. So we're going to get ready to sign off. Thanks so much, counselor colleagues. Thanks to you all for doing this work in partnership and on quick notice. This all came together in 48 hours. Thanks so much for MESA for having a social justice equity lens and for helping us have this space. I am so proud of the work that they're doing as young guys to push this kind of work forward. So if your district's considering student information systems, they're definitely solid. And I'm not tech savvy at all, and they have helped me out so much. So thank y'all for helping us. All right, take care. I'm gonna stop it now. Bye. Wow. Ooh.